In the first degree of Freemasonry, one emerges from darkness and into light. The second degree, or the Fellowcraft, comes out of ignorance and into knowledge. He does so by way of a winding staircase in which he finds himself in the middle chamber of Solomon's temple. In this episode, we'll look at what the knowledge is and correct some of the things that the enemy wants to pervert. My name is Dan. I'm here with my brother Michael, and this is Bromalogy, the study of biblical food. All right, Michael, how you doing, my brother? We're here at the second degree, the Fellowcraft. How are you?
Just talking about this Freemasonry and how it's intertwined with the Bible. But now we are on the second degree of Freemasonry, which is called the Fellowcraft. And if you listen to our first degree, we had many questions that we wanted to discuss. That was, like Dan always says, like that's our most popular video. One of the questions was, how does the Greek fraternities intertwine with Freemasonry? Phi Kappa Sigma. If you look at their crest, if you type Phi Kappa Sigma, the crest consists of skull and bones, just right there. So that's not a huge leap there. Delta Tau Delta is another one. The crest of the Delta Tau Delta badge consists of an all-seeing eye, just straight up there. The shield includes the symbol of a blazing star. Albert Mackey, in his encyclopedia, states that the blazing star is one of the most important Masonic symbols and is symbolic of a true Mason who, perfecting himself in the way of truth, that is to say, by advancing in knowledge, becomes like a blazing star shining with brilliancy in the midst of darkness. And then the final one, this fraternity is literally called the Square and Compass Fraternity, but they merged with Sigma Mu Sigma, which you can research that, in 1952. The objective of these two were, literally in quotes, to thoroughly indoctrinate the College of Men of America with the traditions of our American Masonic heritage through ritualistic and fraternity-conducted educational programs diverted to the rites of initiation and our American way of life. And just to end it here, the crest of this one, Sigma Mu Sigma, all-seeing eye of God. Dan, do you have anything to add to that regarding the Greek fraternity and Freemasonry? And off to you, brother.
Yeah, dude. So the original question, I think it was a woman reached out. Her son or her daughter is in college and wants to join a sorority or fraternity. It was one of those two things. Freemasonry is the oldest of all fraternities and the largest in the world, and all of fraternities spin out of or come out of Freemasonry. And so Michael did some of that research to sort of support what I was saying there. Is it's all connected, it's all rooted in Freemasonry. It's fun to do it. Let me not lie. I enjoy doing fringe topics. I enjoy teaching on Freemasonry, but I want to do what's God honoring. And we've been trying to think through, should we just stick to reading the Bible and just doing Bible studies, or is it God honoring to do things like a Freemasonry episode? God answered that through one of the pastors that I work with. His name is Pastor Sage. He's a great dude. Love you, Pastor Sage, if you listen to this podcast. And in his congregation, there's a gentleman that used to be a high priest in the Church of Satan. And he left the Church of Satan, since then came into faith in Jesus Christ and was baptized, praise God, right? And was all in. And then shortly after that, he came across Freemasonry and wanted to join it. And some people think there's no issue at all. In fact, a lot of pastors are Freemasons. A lot of folks who attend church are Freemasons. Again, guys, we talked about this in the first episode. Most people that are Freemasons don't really know the dark side or what's really going on, and don't even understand the meanings of the rituals. It's mainly just a night out from the wife. That's what it boils down to. And Pastor Sage, trying to shepherd him well, did the right thing, and told him it doesn't mesh with Christianity. And the way in which he went about showing him that is he found something on the internet that just kind of highlighted, here's where the conflicts are. And then that guy went cold. He ghosted him. So he hasn't heard from that guy. The guy hasn't returned back to church, at least not that I know of. Maybe that's changed since then. And it got me thinking, that's part of why we do these episodes, or that's one of the reasons we do, is to equip the saints for the work of ministry, as Paul would say it in Ephesians. And it's not just pastors, but it's folks that are Christians that maybe have family, friends, or they themselves are looking at pursuing Freemasonry. I want to be able to equip people to have a personal discipleship conversation. Printing something out on the internet is fine, but it removes the relationship part of it, and it's hard to do discipleship without an eyeball to eyeball conversation. So we're hoping in part that these episodes will help equip the saints for the work of ministry by bringing you from darkness into light, so you're not ignorant about this topic, and help you see where the gospel and God is all in it.
Yeah, we always talk about being fishers of men. There's many lures, many fish out there. We're just trying to provide another lure, another way to reach people in order to share the good news of the gospel. But awesome stuff, Dan. So let's just start this episode, the Fellowcraft. But before we do that, real quickly, just if people didn't watch the first two, why did you join Freemasonry? Talk like one or two sentences on the first degree, and then what happens in the second degree? What happens? Do you already have the first degree, you're already in the club, and they just say, here's another door, or what happens with regarding this degree?
First degree, I know you and I talked a little bit about the actual ritual side of it, where you're blindfolded. You have to be in what's called due in ancient form. So you've got like your left breast is open, and really weird stuff, right? Well, when you go to the second degree, you kind of find yourself back in the same situation. You're blindfolded again. You're being escorted by a brother that's like doing all the talking for you. He's knocking on the door 3 times. Boom, boom, boom. Someone on the other side of a door who comes here, real aggressive, and like you're blindfolded and you're in a vulnerable spot, right? Like, so here I am again in the same situation. I'm in a room adjacent to the lodge. I'm dressed up in ritualistic garb. So you're led to this lodge blindfolded. You're hearing things happening around you. You stay blindfolded and stay in this point of destitute, if you will, or blindness, until you take the obligation. Once you take the obligation, then the hoodwink is removed, and you can see all that the second degree teaches. So it exposes you to all of the lodge ordinance, all of the things within an open Fellowcraft lodge has to offer. This is all what's called like the first section. And there's really not a lot I think it's even worth spending any time on in the first section of the degree, with just one exception, possibly two. But the biggest exception I would say is when you're blindfolded, somebody in the lodge reads out loud Amos 7, which is a pretty peculiar part of the Bible, if you ask me.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm going to be reading Amos 7:7-9. It says, "Thus he showed me, and behold, the Lord was standing by a vertical wall with a plumb line in his hand. The Lord said to me, 'What do you see, Amos?' And I said, 'A plumb line.' Then the Lord said, 'Behold, I'm about to put a plumb line in the midst of my people Israel. I will spare them no longer. The high places of Isaac will be desolated, and the sanctuaries of Israel laid waste. Then I will rise up against the house of Jeroboam with the sword.'" I just have a few notes on this plumb line, and then I'll hand it back to Dan here. A plumb line is a cord with a non-magnetic weight attached to one end. When the cord is held in such a way that the weight can dangle freely, an exact vertical can be determined. Painters, carpenters, they use these plumb lines to keep their work straight. I found it interesting too in Amos 7:7 in the Septuagint, which is the Greek version. It says, "Thus the Lord showed me, and behold, he stood upon a wall of adamant, and in his hand was an adamant." And I did some research on the word adamant. It was actually a stone, such as a diamond, formerly believed to be an impenetrable hardness, so something hard. The Vulgate Latin version, so I just read the Septuagint, the Vulgate Latin, it says it's a mason's trowel or a plaster with which they lay their plaster and mortar on the building. So it even says mason's trowel.
There's this operative and speculative concept at work again. So there's an actual physical purpose for that instrument or that tool. But then there's the speculative side of things. There's a spiritual way in which we can build our temples or our lives. And the plumb line, if you will, is what's proving whether we're upright men or not. From a biblical perspective, represents Torah, represents the law. That's the measurement in which we can say, am I living the way a Christian lives or not? What's the instrument to measure that? I think Torah does that. Torah is the plumb line. The other thing, I think in the first section of the second degree, before we get into good stuff, that's worth noting is the password itself. So as you walk through different degrees of Masonry, you're given different handshakes, different passwords. The second degree password is Shibboleth. The story itself can be found in Judges 11. It's really Judges 10 through 12, but the meat of this narrative is in Judges 11, and it's a conflict with Ephraim. The tribe of Ephraim is quarreling with Jephthah, which is the son of a prostitute and a mighty warrior, and feeling slighted for being called to fight against the Amorites. The conflict escalates into a civil war with Jephthah and the Gileadites. And the Gileadites, with Jephthah's help, they win. And what they win is they secure the fords of the Jordan River. So this is kind of the banks of the Jordan River. And they identify as Ephraimites by their inability to pronounce the word Shibboleth. The Ephraimites could not say the word Shibboleth because of the dialect that they spoke. And Masons, or Freemasonry, seems to be aligning with Jephthah, the son of a prostitute. So as I started to unpack this, I look at the word, the Hebrew word there for mighty warrior that Jephthah subscribed to in Judges 11, verse 1. And wouldn't you know, it's the same Hebrew word used in Genesis 10 to describe Nimrod. So if you want to look it up, it's Strong's 1368 in the Hebrew. And one of the meanings of this word is the word giant, which is a very peculiar and interesting way to describe Jephthah and associated him with Nimrod. So I want to invite the audience into this research. Help me, help Michael and I make this Canaanite bloodline connection here. I know it's there. It's right in front of our faces. I just didn't have the time to really, really unpack it. But I did find this connection with this Hebrew word, giant, which is subscribed to Nimrod.
I'm actually a big Seinfeld guy. I've watched all those episodes. If you guys are too, I'm going to point to an episode where Shibboleth, a type of Shibboleth, was actually used. It's called the Van Buren Boys, and Kramer unintentionally makes a street gang's Shibboleth by his outstretched fingers, like showing eight fingers instead of 10, signifying the eighth president, Martin Van Buren. So there was a street gang in this episode called the Van Buren Boys, and he actually did. He gave the sign, which was 8, which signifies the eighth president. So that kind of makes you, if you're kind of confused with Shibboleth, that's a type of Shibboleth. Another one I found really interesting in IT, information technology, a Shibboleth is actually a community-wide password that enables members of that community to access an online resource without revealing their individual identities. So the origin server can vouch for the identity without giving the target server any other additional information. So it's kind of like a hidden gate. So it cannot be portrayed by outsiders. I thought that was cool too. It just shows you the different layers, possibly what Freemasonry is trying to do with the different layers of the degrees. But as far as Nimrod, yeah. So, Dan kind of laid it out there that, at least in my research, Nimrod became a giant. He wasn't born one. Like, he wasn't like one of the angels having sex. He wasn't the children of that. He was a normal person, and he became a giant. And then that's where you get a lot of your conspiracies regarding, DNA manipulation or something. But so that word, it is a mighty hunter. I think that's what Dan was talking about. Esau was also a mighty hunter. So that's a similar bloodline. Some identify him with Ninus. And according to Greek mythology, that was a Mesopotamian king and husband of Queen Semiramis. We've talked about that before, about, these different mythologies of all telling the same story. Some have identified Nimrod as the husband of Queen Semiramis. We're getting back to Freemasonry. According to the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, the legend of the craft in the old constitutions refers to Nimrod as one of the founders of Masonry. In the York MS, number 1, we read, "At ye making of the Tower of Babel, there was a masonry first much esteemed of, and the king of Babylon, called Nimrod, was a mason himself, and loved well masons." So, at least according to this Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, Nimrod was a mason. I know the writings of Abraham say he was a mason as well, but that's extra biblical. Read that if you will. And then finally, Josephus. What Josephus talks about this. We always love quoting Josephus regarding Yeshua and all that, but Josephus says Nimrod was the grandson of Ham, the son of Noah, a bold man and of great strength of hand. Josephus says he also gradually changed the government into tyranny, seeing no other way of turning men from the fear of God, but to bring them in a constant dependence on his power. Think about that. Is that happening today? Is there a spirit of Nimrod happening today? And finally, this is what, yeah. Yeah. And then, we'll get to that. And then Josephus talks about the Tower of Babel. He says they built a tower, neither sparing any pain or being in a degree negligent about the work. And by reason of the multitude of his hands employed it in it, it grew very high, sooner than anyone could expect. But the thickness of the tower was so great, it was strongly built. It was great height. It was built with burnt bricks cemented together with mortar and bitumen that might not be liable to admit water. So it's even saying that it was higher than what the flood could have done. The phallic, everybody, they talk about, Nimrod and all that kind of stuff. Christmas tree. What do you think about all this stuff
I
regarding
mean, this
Nimrod?
is insane. That's such incredible research, dude. If you
Oh
guys
yeah,
want to dig more into that judge's narrative, if you see some other Canaanite bloodline at work and making the connection to that, I'd be curious to know who Jephthah's mom was. The Bible says she's a prostitute, but I don't believe it gives a name. So that would be interesting to find out. If I was a betting man, I'd say there's some Canaanite bloodline in that prostitute, but I'm just kind of throwing that out there. So the blindfold is removed. We got the password. We got rid of we set our obligation. Hoodwink is now off. So now we're being exposed to the information that's contained within the Fellowcraft degree. The very first thing that you learn about, let's remind the audience again of operative and speculative masonry. Operative masonry is building a structure that manifests in the physical. Speculative is building a structure in the spiritual. And I believe this is connected to that natural law of as above, so below. Let's take the next step as the Fellowcraft. You're introduced, believe it or not, to the Jewish Sabbath. That's the first lesson that you're taught coming out of darkness or out of ignorance into knowledge. That's an
very
interesting thing.
interesting.
The first
Yep.
thing they want you to get down pat is the Sabbath. And I think what you'll see as we move through this information, it opens up with the light side and then it kind of pivots into the dark side. And you'll see what I mean. By the way, this is where they get the idea of the checkered floors, the white and black checkered floors that you see in the lodges. It's talking about both the light entity or deity and the dark one. So it starts with the light, starts with the Jewish Sabbath, and then it goes into the creation story. And by the way, the lecture that's done during this ritual is beautiful. If you could see it, this is truly a part that's worth seeing. I mean, it is beautiful if it's done well. And it starts with the first day of creation, and it says this is where light was first formed. This is where they get the Latin term lux fiat, let there be light. And this is in the Genesis account. This is where I believe God the Father calls forth the Son as the leader and the ruler and the king of all things. And this is where I think the enemy gets a little upset. He doesn't like that. He gets jealous and wants to actually be in that position. So that's what Masonry is teaching about the creation story in day one. Then it pivots to day two. And it was the creation of the firmament. Isn't that interesting? So Freemasonry teaches on day two, what they want you to see about the creation story is the firmament. And for those of you that are not familiar with the firmament, it's the idea, basically we live in the Truman Show, that their outer space that NASA is teaching us it's a lie. It doesn't just expand billions and billions and billions of miles away, but all of the stars, the sun and the moon and all things that God created are contained within the firmament. So Freemasonry teaches on day two, the firmament. Day three, it teaches what we might describe as the Garden of Eden. So this is our home as God intended it to be. It includes all the food that we would eat. So this is any seed-bearing fruit. All of that was all created in day three. Then it pivots to day four, and it talks specifically about astronomy. This is where it talks about the moon and the stars and the sun. Day five, aquatic life and birds of the air. So day five, it's talking about basically filling up the waters, the oceans with aquatic life, whales, dolphins, fish, and the birds that we see fly. So of course we know the correlation with the number 6. It wants you, Freemasonry's teaching the creation of day 6 specifically was when the beasts were created and the reptiles. And anyone that's done any research about the reptilian races and that sort of thing kind of sees the implication here. So that's day 6. The other thing that God created was man. And this is where God breathed the Ruach life into man on day 6. And then it goes out of its way to say that God's last and best gift to man, he creates what we call woman. It speaks very, very highly of the woman. Very highly. I mean, the verbiage that's used in the degree is she's all kinds of softness. I mean, it's really, truly beautiful. If you watch the degree, all the men in the room are like that. Yeah, we all can relate to that. And then I think this lecture really overall it's pointing to God's sovereign hand. It goes out of its way in the lecture to tell you that, hey, we want you to note how good God is. He created everything that man and beasts and birds and fish and reptiles, all that they need to live. So, like your furnishing, your home, a place to lay your head at night, and food. And it points out the sovereignty and the goodness of God that he would create those things before he created man and beast. They had all that they needed. So that's, I mean, he's really beautiful. It's really pointing out some really good stuff, right? The seventh day was the Sabbath day. And quote, the ritual says the Sabbath, God blesses it, he made it holy, and he sanctified it. However, very, very, very quickly, we pivot and there's a worship song that's sang right after this creation story teaching. And it's a poem that literally says the terminology, the all seeing eye. So this poem is sang, recited right after this creation story to pay homage to the great architect of the universe that is responsible for all of this creation. It gives the credit to the all seeing eye.
I liked how you were describing the firmament. I look at it like, when you were a kid, you go to a stellarium. All the children would be in this, little dome, and you see the stars going in order. That's pretty cool. I love how you talk about the women. Dan and I, we love talking about like wisdom. There's Dan mentioned in the first episode about this wisdom spirit. We think it's the Holy Spirit. And then you said, he created everything and then created man. I'm always talking about how a priesthood term is like having dominion over this stuff. So he had to create everything and then we became the rulers of it and it's actually a responsibility. It's not really like a bad rulership. It's like I'm honored to be able to have dominion over this stuff. So this is all real good stuff, man. This is and then the all seeing eye, I don't even know what to say. I mean, when I first opened up about the Greek fraternities, they were all over the logos and the crests. So it's pretty crazy that there's a poem about the all-seeing eye, man.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the sleight of hand, right? They're giving you all this really good, biblically accurate information, and then they go and give homage to the all-seeing eye. And I think this is where in the degree it kind of starts to take a turn, right? It goes from explaining the light, let there be light, to this dark entity. And the very next thing it pivots to after this all-seeing eye poem is it goes into the building of the temple. And it starts to explain what it looked like for the Masons to build the temple. And for the sake of time for this episode, I'm just going to give you some text to go back and read for yourself. And it's in 1 Kings chapters 5 through 8. And you can also find it in 2 Chronicles chapter 3. That talks about when the construction of the temple was happening, you couldn't hear the clanging of metals. You couldn't hear the sawing of wood. In fact, it was completely silent as this temple was being built, which is just a bizarre thing to point out. King Solomon used demons to build the temple, and that's why you couldn't hear the clanging and you couldn't hear the construction work. This goes back to that operative and speculative conversation where there was this building that was taking place in the speculative or in the spiritual, but it was manifesting in the operative or in the physical. He used a signet ring to give him power over these demons. And if you look at Masons, almost all Freemasons, at least active ones, will wear the square and compasses signet ring. And I believe that's what that's standing for. It's what it's emblematic of is King Solomon's ring that gives them power over the demonic forces.
Wow.
This is pretty crazy stuff. Then the degree pivots over to the pillars, and it kind of talks at length about the pillars. They gave you like measurements. They tell you the material that it was made of. It gives you the name of them. One pillar was named, I believe it's Jachin. I think the other one is Boaz. Now, I think the pillars are going to be important for a much later episode, like I think way down the line, and it might be somewhere in like the 30th degree. The pillars, the purpose of them was to contain the blueprints for the Mason to build the structures and to build the temple. And the legend has it that the name of God was found in the rubble from the destruction of the second temple. It was found in the rubble of one of the pillars. And when they opened it up or exposed the cracked pillar, they found the name of God. It was on this like tablet.
Wow.
And one last thing on the pillars, I think that's worth noting is they were casted out of the clay from the banks of the Jordan River, which is the same material that these pillars are casted out of. Then the degree pivots over to globes, like literally, like think of a globe, like what Earth is shaped like. I don't know. Let's just, it's to me, it's interesting because you have this firmament idea in the creation story. And then when we pivot to the dark details of the dark entity, now we're getting into globes. So I'm wondering if
Wow.
maybe the whole Copernican model is actually based off of a Freemasonic lie. Then the degree pivots over to different types of architecture. And ultimately, it represents the body of the church as the ornaments of New Jerusalem. However, the sleight of hand is Masons aren't pointing to the church as the ornaments, but rather to themselves. So it's saying if you're part of this lodge system or you're a brother, you're a Freemason, then you are going to be, or and you are right now, the ornaments of the New Jerusalem. In
Wow.
other words, we're the real church.
And that Revelation 3 is Philadelphia, and that's what they're given to be ornaments in the New Jerusalem. And what does Philadelphia mean? It's brotherly love. So it kind of goes into the
Oh, wow.
yeah, yeah, kind of what you're saying there.
That's interesting. Hey, that's something else worth chasing down, guys. There's a lot here. I'm telling you, this is why I like this Fellowcraft degree. I mean, there's just so much good information packed. I mean, we can't even each like portion of this could be its own episode. That's how
For
much
sure.
information is there. I mean, you really got to process everything going on in here. So real cool stuff. All right, well, let's pivot again. So the degree continues to walk. Again, you're being walked through the lodge. So you don't have your hoodwink on anymore. You're being brought to like different stations, and each station kind of has its own person representing that station, and they have their own little lesson that they're teaching, and they're pointing to you certain symbols and signs, and they want you to like see these things. And they walk you to this next step, and it's called like the 7 steps. I don't remember exactly the terminology that's used, but what it represents is the 7 liberal arts and sciences. And I'm not going to unpack every single one because, like natural law, I don't want to teach the dark side. That's not really the goal of this episode. I just want you to be aware of it. And if you, on your own time, want to kind of unpack it, feel free to do what you got to do. But the way that the Freemasons are describing the 7 liberal arts is that they are, quote, a brand of education that polishes the mind. 7 liberal arts. The first one is grammar. The second one is rhetoric. The third is logic. The fourth is arithmetic. The fifth is geometry. The sixth is music. And the seventh is astronomy. So I know I said I'm not going to unpack these, but I want to make a couple quick notes about 2 of them. First one, astronomy. Astronomy comes from God, guys. I think there's some confusion around this. Astrology is the perversion of it. Astronomy, God encourages us to look at the signs in the sky. So, for example, on April 8th coming up, we've got this eclipse. Astrology is the perversion of it. That's when people are like talking about zodiac signs and trying to manipulate
How your day will
what's
go.
happening. Exactly. And there's spirit behind that. The last thing I'll really touch on with these liberal arts is music, because the lecture really spends a lot of time on this, and it speaks very eloquent words about music. And as I'm reading this, it made me think of King of Tyre in Ezekiel 28. It talks about the quote unquote workmanship of your timbrels and your pipes. Anyone that's ever gone through a degree knows how big of a role King Tyre played in the legend of Hiram Abiff. But for those of you who might be new to Bible study, Ezekiel 28 is one of those chapters in the Bible that supposedly is dual prophecy that's talking about Satan or talking about Lucifer. And this is where we get this idea. I mean, the whole chapter's about it, but this part of the chapter talks about Lucifer being like the king of music or in charge of music when he was in heaven. And again, tying this back to the degree work, it really speaks highly of music. It really wants you to fall in love with this idea of music. And again, this is after we've kind of pivoted from the light side to the dark side. So I think there's a connection there with this push for music and how beautiful it is, and King of Tyre, who plays a massive role in Freemasonry.
Yeah, and Satan is also the prince of the air, right? So that goes along with the music. But Ezekiel 28 in the New King James, I'm just going to read 11 through 15. I would encourage you to read the whole chapter. As Dan said, there's a lot of good stuff in there. But Ezekiel 28, 11, moreover, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, take up a lamentation for the king of Tyre, and say to him, Thus says the Lord God, you were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom. Dan and I think wisdom's the Holy Spirit, and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering, the sardius, the topaz, and diamond, beryl, onyx, and jasper, sapphire, turquoise, and emerald with gold. The workmanship of your timbrels and pipes was prepared for you on the day you were created. You were the anointed cherub who covers. I established you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked back and forth in the midst of fiery stones. You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created till iniquity was found in you. I mean, that's just so deep, man. Dan mentioned dual prophecy. You know, a lot of people are just so black and white. They'll read it and be like, well, this is the king of Tyre. This ain't Satan. But then you look, it's like he's talking about he was in the garden. This fleshly king was in the garden. He was a cherub. Do you guys know what a cherub is? He was full of wisdom. He had all these
Mhm.
stones. I just want to say, as far as the dual prophecy, the king of Tyre was called Itobal, Ittobal. So Baal, obviously, and then Itto, King
Mhm.
Itto. So that's where the dual prophecy comes from. But if you read it, to me, literally, it's talking about Satan. But the only thing I want to say on this is that, it says every precious stone was your covering, and then it went through that. It's comparable to the stones and the breastplate of judgment that was worn by the high priest of Israel. So if you read
Mhm.
Exodus 28 and 39, it kind of describes that. Satan was there. It appears like this cherub, and then a cherub, if you read in Genesis, was the one guarding the Garden of Eden. Cherubs were guarding it. So did he sneak in there and kind of, tempt Eve there? And then obviously it looked like he was a priest because he had all the stones. And then
Wow.
iniquity was found in him. So I don't know what you think about that, Dan.
I mean, it's awesome. And the stones makes me think of when you move to further degrees, especially if you go up, well, particularly if you go up the York right side, your next step is what they call the red house. So this idea of like take the blue pill. That's what we're doing right now. First, second, third degree of masonry, the blue house, taking the blue pill. Take the red pill. That's going to fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh degree. And in that house, the red house, they wore that exact high priest garb with the
Wow.
breastplate. So, I mean, we'll get into this probably later on, but it talks about, holy is the Lord. And you're always saying that terminology in that house, and it feels very Christian. In fact, that's known to be the most Christian aspect of Freemasonry. But I think if we take a further look at this, you've got the king of Tyre, or in this case, I believe it was Satan. You're right. A cherub is an angel. So it's a type of angel. And I think that's a very interesting idea. I've never heard that before, that maybe he was guarding the Garden of Eden, Satan was, or
Sure.
the serpent was, and snuck in to
Yeah.
do his bidding with Eve.
And stones aren't bad. Father created stones, right? So are you using it for bad or good? Peter says we are
Mhm.
living stones. The New Jerusalem is made of these same stones. So it's a priest either obeying or disobeying. That's how I see
Wow.
it. So
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. Good, 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 man. Well, I just have one more thing, and then we can kind of wrap up this degree. But the last thing that the degree is really going to talk about is the letter G that's in between the square and compasses. And I know we talked about this, I believe, on a previous episode as well. What Masonry says of itself about the letter G is that it stands for geometry. So one could look at that and say the grand architect of the universe, or the one that's building all of creation, used a particular math called geometry to lay horizontals and perpendiculars. And I think that lends itself to the idea of biblical cosmology. And that's basically what Masonry's teaching of itself about the letter G in between the square and compasses. What I think it means, or a bigger meaning, or maybe this is an evil dual prophecy, if you will, is the G is actually standing for the hybrid um, result of the fallen angels coming and sleeping with the daughters of man and creating a lowercase g God. And we see this in Genesis 6, Jude 6, and Enoch 6. And I don't think that 666 is a coincidence at all. And what's going on in Enoch 6 is the fallen angels, one third of them followed Samael or followed Lucifer, followed Satan down to do the bidding, the same thing that they saw him do in the garden with Eve. They repeated the act with the daughters of man. And when they left their humble abode, they left heaven, they descended upon Mount Hermon. And this is where the first obligation was taken by the fallen angels, saying, we promise or we swear that we will move forward with this plan, this idea of this hybrid plan that we have. And we're going to take the very first oath right here on Mount Hermon. And I think we talked about that in the first episode. In fact, I think our thumbnail for that episode is Mount
Sure.
Hermon and pointing that out. So I think that's what the G is representing. But what Mason is teaching of itself is that it represents geometry. So there you have it. The Fellowcraft degree. You've been presented with everything you need on this side of heaven. So you now have all the information, all the light you need to conquer anything on this side of heaven. And what we'll find is when you move to the third degree, which is called the Master Mason degree, and it's considered the highest degree in all of Freemasonry, is it's going to show you what you need for the other side of heaven. So when we do the next episode, the third degree, Master Mason degree, we will be moving, you're entered as an apprentice or you're initiated as an entered apprentice, and then you're passed to the degree of Fellowcraft, and then you are raised as a Master Mason.
Wow.
And we're going to unpack that.
Yeah, man, good stuff. We opened up with the Greek fraternity and how it intertwines. Dan talked about, we were at Amos 7 about the plumb line. We want you to do more research on that. What is a plumb line? What is it measuring? What are you being measured against? Then Dan brought up Nimrod and how, in the book of Judges, and the password is Shibboleth. So guys, do more research on that. It was pretty interesting. I'd never even heard of that. I had to do my own research, and it's just crazy. You see the gray area. You see what they're trying to do there. Then talked about Nimrod and how he became a mighty one, a giant, and then all the Nimrod Masonic connections. He talked about keeping Sabbath, the 7 days of creation, 2 genders, all-seeing eye. They end it in the all-seeing eye, stellarium, rulership, dominion. Then he talked about demons, building the temple with Solomon, and then the pillars, architecture, liberal arts. And then Ezekiel 28, we talked about that, and the cherub and Satan. We're thinking it's a dual prophecy with Satan being that cherub. And then he just ended it with the square and compass. So I thought this was an awesome episode. Second degree of Freemasonry. We hope you enjoyed it. This is we're going to keep doing these. We're getting a lot of traction with these, and we think, as Dan opened, we feel Father is wanting us to do these, to equip the saints to be able to answer questions. So this has been great. This is, I think what we're going to do next is another fringe, Dan. I think we're going to do either something in Enoch, right? There's something in Enoch. We might do 2 wisdoms about the,
Yes.
But in Enoch, we'd maybe doing the fallen spirits. This might be a good, hedge going from this to the gifts of the fallen spirits. In
right.
Enoch, they gave man a bunch of gifts that maybe they shouldn't have. Guys, we'll put a button on this. We love you guys. Thanks for the support. This is the second degree of Freemasonry, the Fellowcraft. This is Bromalogy, the study of biblical food. Shalom.